welcome back to Britannia Panopticon. I'm Judith, and this is part 3 of my little live talks during the hashtag Doors Open Days Festival. Of course, this year it's the Doors Closed Day Festival because we can't actually open the building to the public. So we thought we'd show you around little bits of the building that you've maybe never seen before and tell you some of the untold stories of Britannia Panopticon, because this year's theme for Doors Open Day Festival is Untold Stories. Now, the Britannia Panopticon is the world's oldest surviving music hall, and it didn't survive purely by chance. It survived because of the people that operated the building and, of course, the working man's urine, which I think we discussed on Wednesday and actually on Monday as well. But we're not going to talk about the wee-wee today. We're talking about the other great showman that operated this building. In fact, we're talking about the greatest showman of them all as far as Glasgow is concerned. That man was a man called A.E. Pickard. Now, A.E., or Albert Ernest Pickard, was the last person to operate this building as a music hall. Now, by 1905, Britannia Music Hall had become so old and worn and tired that it came up for rent again. And initially it seemed that the music hall itself was going to close altogether because of the competition from all the variety theatres like the King's and the Coliseum and the Pavilion, all of which are open and drawing huge crowds by 1905. Nobody really wanted to come here anymore as a music hall. So young Albert Ernest Pickard, at that time only in his mid-30s, approached the then owner of the building, James Anderson, and asked him if he could take over the music hall. And James Anderson thought, well, I'll give the new lad a chance. Now, A.E. Pickard was from Bradford in Yorkshire. He originally started his showman career with a travelling electric rifle range. This electric rifle range, he had great success with. He travelled with a couple of his friends. They went all over the UK, and then he settled in London. He bought a showground in London, but the competition in London was immense. So Pickard and his friends decided to move to Glasgow. Glasgow at that time already had a reputation of being the entertainment capital outside the city of London itself. And so they came here with great hope in their hearts. The first building that Pickard took over was 2 doors down, just on the corner of King Street and Trongate. At that time it was Fell's Waxworks, and he bought it for just a couple of £1,000, complete with all its fixtures and fittings, including some of the exhibits and animal cages. He then took over the Britannia Music Hall in the January of 1906 from the owner, James Anderson. And whilst he was in here, he actually closed the building for several months when he first moved in, and he started to do a lot of work in the building. And people in the Trongate watched in fascination as all sorts of strange boxes and items were carried into the building, but strangely nothing was really carried back out again. It wasn't until the May of 1906 that Pickard was in any position to reopen the building, and he did a big grand opening, calling it the Britannia and Grand Panopticon. Now, the people queued in their thousands on the Trongate to gain admission. They wanted to see what an eccentric Yorkshireman had done. When they went into the auditorium, they must have been hugely disappointed because not one thing had changed in the auditorium. Not even a lick of paint had been added to the then already dirty and stained walls, dirtied with nicotine and tar from all the smoking. He hadn't even reupholstered the seats. In fact, it was still the same bench seating that people had seen previously to the building closing. But what Pickard had done was added 2 staircases up to the attic from the balcony. And here we are in the attic. Now, the attic, as you can see, is very well illuminated. But in addition to these glass windows on 2 sides of the attic space, we also had a huge glass ceiling area. The glazed atrium area was actually in that little booth over there, and the light would come in and illuminate the whole space. He had potted plants and all kinds of exotic plants up here, but he also had waxwork exhibits of all the most popular characters of the day, the most popular character being the latest person to be executed at the Duke Street prison. Yes, people actually used to queue to see this. He would get the clothing off of the person that had just been executed at Duke Street, because nobody could see executions at this point, and once upon a time it had been the most popular entertainment in Glasgow. So he would buy the items of clothing that the executee was wearing when they were hanged, and he would also buy the remnants of their last meal off the hangman. He would then dress a dummy in the items of clothing and display the remnants of the last meal, and people would queue and pay to see this exhibit. He also, in the attic though, had a rooftop carnival with 19 different entertainments of the era. Now he had all kinds of stuff up here. He had hook-em-ups, pipe breakers, coconut shies, Aunt Sally's love in a tub. He had little balls for throwing in the clown's mouth. He had fortune-telling machines. He had automatons where you would put a penny in and the whole scene would come to life. One of his most popular automatons, though, was kept next door in his American museum, and that was the Laughing Cavalier. He had a Laughing Cavalier downstairs that he kept in the foyer, and people would love to just queue up and see the Cavalier moving, and that's what would attract people upstairs. But this wasn't all he had up in this attic. Oh, I say, boys, no noise, please. Recording up here. Sorry about that. We have drag queens in. So anyway, back to the attic. So up here in this section of the attic, he added to the entertainments by bringing in freak shows. Now, people don't like us calling them freak shows these days, but back in the day, that's what they were called. Some people call them peep shows and other people call them geek shows, although peep show, strictly speaking, is something different by the 1970s. Anyway, this is where those freak shows were kept. We have these huge, great big timbers here, and Picard had attracted freaks from all over Europe. And he displayed them in little booths in between these great big beams. Unfortunately, we had to remove the last evidence of the beams when we were doing the roof. The Mitchell family paid to have the roof completely refurbished in 2006. And in order for that roof work to be done, our beautiful engineer, John Addison, who sadly is no longer with us, built this big steel structure to support these huge, great big timbers. So sadly, we had to get rid of the last evidence of the freak show booths themselves. But they were in here. In between each of these was a freak show booth or another entertainment. For example, the first booth there was actually the coconut shy. Not that you would ever actually win a coconut, because the balls that you used to throw at the coconuts were made of balsa wood, so were practically as light as air. You'd have had to put a right bit of wally behind that to knock your coconut off the shy. But these other ones were where you would see people like, for example, Ida Campbell. Ida Campbell was billed as the human trunk. She didn't have any legs and she only had one arm, and she would demonstrate how she could work a sewing machine, both hand and treadle, without assistance, and produce beautiful seamistry. She would also illustrate how she could get up and down stairs without any assistance. Now, you might think that's a terrible thing to exhibit a lady called Ida Campbell just because she didn't have any legs and she only had one arm. But consider this. Ida Campbell was born into a show family. The story goes that her father was a lion tamer. Whilst her mother was heavily pregnant with Ida, her father was mauled to death by the lion. His legs were ripped off and one of his arms. Doctors at the time, when Ida was born, thought that the stress of seeing her husband killed like that by the lions is what caused Ida to be born with a deformity that killed her husband. So Ida was a medical miracle as far as they were concerned in those days. And Ida's mother had a choice. She either kept her daughter with her and carried on travelling with the shows and getting an income, or she would put her into an asylum, which in the 1880s was not a very pleasant place to be. So Ida grew up in the fairgrounds. And as she grew older, she decided to become an exhibit herself. And by the time she was an adult, she was amassing quite a fortune for herself. As a matter of fact, when she was exhibited in this music hall up here in the attic, she was earning a personal equivalent of £23,000 a week. That was her personal income. But we had other freaks up here as well, and some of them were not quite as genuine as Ida Campbell. For example, Monsieur Bute. Now, Monsieur Bute was billed as the world fasting man. He was apparently the man who held the world record for fasting. Yes, people would queue to see a man standing in a box, not eating. That's all he did, not eat. Yes, apparently, allegedly. But was this true? Well, rumours got around that he actually had a hollow cane, and when nobody was looking, he would open the cane, pop out a protein pill and take that, and that's what sustained him. But the thing is, we think that this myth was actually perpetuated by A.E. Pickard himself, and that it was to disguise the truth of the matter, because actually it was the stage manager's wife who would bake a pie every day and have it delivered at the stroke of midnight. So it was the stage manager's steak pies that were sustaining one's Bute after all. However, he managed to keep going for about 43 days. Every day they used to actually post a notice outside and people would queue just to see the doctors putting up the notice saying how well one's Bute was doing. And the other freaks that we had up here, well, as Peter will tell you, we had a leprechaun. Yes, Peter's doing the camera, by the way, today. Yeah, a leprechaun. And our leprechaun was known as the legless leprechaun, not because he didn't have any legs, but because he was a little bit fond of the alcohol. Whiskey, apparently, was his favourite. According to Pickard, he had found this leprechaun in Ireland himself, living underneath a tin bucket. And he had captured the leprechaun and brought him here to this very attic to be viewed. Problem was, although Pickard went to great expense of getting a lovely set of Irish green clothing made for the leprechaun, he would never keep the clothing on. He would generally only be seen naked and would swear and spit at the audience. I don't think he was very popular. Then there was, of course, the human spider. I love the human spider. As a matter of fact, she's still here. And she runs our mystery rooms, which will be coming back soon, so look out for those. The human spider, however, although she looks like a human head with a spider's body, is in fact a stage illusion. It is a cabinet illusion, which uses mirrors to give the impression that it is a human head on a spider's body. But Spadora was such a huge attraction back in the day. And the lady that was Spadora was Flora, the usherette. And she would be in there literally for 12 hours at a time. I don't know how she did it. I can usually manage to be in that box for about half an hour at most before my neck starts to hurt. So Flora, kudos to you, my lovely, for doing the human spider. But another favourite of mine in the freak shows was Sleeping Beauty. Yes, they actually did exhibit Sleeping Beauty. They billed that she'd been asleep for over 200 years, and that if you stood and watched her sleeping in her bed, it was fully dressed up, her beautiful bed was laid out, decorated with beautiful, beautiful covers and beautiful cushions, and there was beautiful Sleeping Beauty amongst them all, sleeping away. And if you watched closely, you could see her chest rising up and down as she slept. Like I said, she had been asleep for over 200 years. But every now and again, she would move her little finger. And as she moved her little finger, that would tell the attendant that she needed a wee-wee. They would close the exhibit, pull the curtains over it, then Sleeping Beauty would hop out of bed, have a wee-wee, jump back into bed and get back into position again. So that's the trick behind Sleeping Beauty. No real trick at all, really. Well, we had literally hundreds of freaks throughout the years. In fact, we even had the world's shortest man, Tom Thumb. No, not General Tom Thumb. General Tom Thumb had died by this point. He died in the 1890s, and of course General Tom Thumb was the first ever show business millionaire. Our Tom Thumb, whose real name was Harold Pyatt, was generally billed as Tiny Tim. But Pickard chose to bill him as Tom Thumb to take advantage of the fact that the real Tom Thumb had passed away by this point, and it was a great way to advertise the act. So Tom Thumb was exhibited here, and he was a full 1 foot shorter than General Tom Thumb. Our Tom Thumb, Harold Pyatt, was in fact only 23 pounds in weight, so he was very light, and only 2 foot in height. In fact, he was less than 2 foot in height. So he was a tiny little chap, and he was in his 40s when he was exhibited in here. Now, I've mentioned this man, A.E. Pickard, Albert Ernest Pickard. He is the man that brought the freak show, the rooftop carnival, and the waxworks to this building, into this attic space above the music hall. Yes, the music hall is right beneath my feet. He kept the music hall going, and he kept the cinematograph going. In fact, he had great success with the music hall as well. But he stopped calling it Britannia Music Hall because nobody wanted to come to the old Brit anymore. Instead, he rebranded it as the Grand Panopticon. Panopticon, that beautiful word that everybody loves to try and get their tongue around. It's actually the ancient Greek term, where it comes from the ancient Greek. Pan, meaning everything, and opti, to see or to view. So the idea was you could see all of the entertainments under the one roof for the one ticket price. Now, Pickard was a brilliant showman. He was the best at selling everything. And he had a lot of competition in town at this point, with music halls, with Hengler Circus, with all kinds of other activities. We even had another waxworks just down the road called Crouch's Wonderland, where they had all kinds of exhibits and displays and a bit of an American museum idea as well. So Pickard turned this whole building into, if you like, a multimedia centre, a multiplex of sorts, where you can see all these entertainments. And you would have thought that a waxworks, a freak show, a rooftop carnival, a music hall, and of course a cinematograph was enough for any one building owner to operate and manage. But it wasn't enough for A.E. Pickard, because there was one more space in this building that hadn't been utilised. That space was in the basement, underneath the pub that was on the ground floor. Now, at this point, the pub was known as the Hillcote Bar and was run by Robert Hillcote and Sons. They weren't really using the cellar for very much. Only the front section of the cellar was used for storing bottles and barrels. So Pickard negotiated with them to take over the rest of the immense basement beneath this building, and he rented it from them for a small amount of money. He then excavated it at extraordinary expense and furnished it with the latest technology in animal cages, opening the basement zoo up as Noah's Ark. He claimed the 23 animal cages in the basement and the collection of animals within them. It was the first time that the phrase Noah's Ark had been used to describe a collection of animals since the biblical time of Noah himself. He even had a giraffe, which he exhibited on the back of a lorry, except for it wasn't a real giraffe, it was a stuffed giraffe. And he didn't have a real giraffe in the basement here because the ceiling is only 7 foot high. You wouldn't have fitted a giraffe in. He did, however, quite tragically, and by the way, this is a warning. If you are animal sensitive, stick your fingers in your ears right now and go la, 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 la for a few minutes, okay? When it's safe, I will do that, and you can take your fingers out, okay? Because the next stories are not very pleasant. One of the animals that was kept in the basement was a 9-foot Russian bear called Bruin. And next to him was a dog-faced baboon, which wasn't much smaller, to be honest, in size. Unfortunately, the two animals were very unhappy, as you can imagine, and in the December of 1908, a fight broke out between the two beasts. They broke down a partition between the cages, and Pickard used it for publicity to advertise his zoo. They managed to separate the two animals, as a Daily Record recorded it, on the 18th of December that year. And they managed to separate the animals, put them into separate cages temporarily, and then he made a big drama and big advertisement about making a new cage for Bruin and a new cage for the dog-faced baboon. Soon after that, there was another incident. He had a little Himalayan bear. Now, Himalayan bears aren't huge. They're about that sort of size. They're not very big, but they are lethal. They have very long talons and they are very, very dangerous animals. Anyway, the Himalayan bear had escaped from the basement zoo and managed to make its way up here into the attic. It caused a right problem. I can tell you, people were running in terror. The freaks were running, the people operating the shows were running, and the customers were running in every direction to escape this little vicious bear. Pickard managed to collect the bear with the zookeeper, Harry, and together they managed to take the bear back into the basement. But that isn't the end of the story. A few days later, the Himalayan bear managed to escape again. But this time he rampaged up the Tron Gate, terrifying the local residents. So Pickard, dressed in +4s and hunting jacket, got out his blunderbuss and shot it. And not only did he shoot it, he filmed himself shooting it. And he called this film Mr. Pickard Goes Hunting and used that for publicity. End of the nasty stories, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, there's a lot of nasty stories in this building, to be honest. The history of the whole social history of Glasgow can be found in this building, one way or another. Now, Pickard, of course, had great success with his Panopticon. No longer was he advertising that the Britannia had room for 1,200 people, for every show. Now he was advertising that there was room for 20,000 people every day. And judging by his ledgers, he got approximately 20,000 people a day through this building to see everything from the basement zoo to the attic rooftop carnival. In fact, in the basement zoo, he added even more wonderful entertainments like distorting mirrors. Yes, a hall of mirrors was put in the basement as well. There wasn't anything that he didn't put in this building between 1906 and 1938 when he was the owner. Peter, have we got any questions yet?
Just a comment by Mira.
Oh, Mira, hello, darling. What's Mira saying?
There she is, our best ever Judith, aka Florrie Bow Wow, talking about the phenomenal Britannia Panopticon.
Oh, thank you, Mira. Hello, darling. I hope you're well. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, when we do get back to having shows again, you will see Mira. Mira is our beautiful Polish pianist, and she is the best at Chopin in the business. I kid you not, she's amazing. She's also available for hire, so if you want your children to learn how to play the piano like the beautiful Mira Opolinska, look her up on Facebook, get in touch with me, I'll put you in touch with her. She's the best piano teacher, as well as the best Chopin pianist, as well as the best pianist for Florrie Bow Wow as well. Anyway, no questions just yet, so I will just keep talking, I guess, if everybody's happy with that. A.E. Pickard was quite a character. He was actually known initially, or billed as, A.E. Pickard Unlimited of London, Paris, Moscow and Bannockburn. He was, of course, from Bradford in Yorkshire, as I explained earlier. But he was a great showman. In fact, he was probably the last of the great showmen, like P.T. Barnum. In fact, P.T. Barnum was his inspiration. Pickard, when he was a young lad in Bradford in Yorkshire, had started life as an engineer's apprentice when he was 11 years old. He wasn't really well suited to being an engineer's apprentice, to be honest. And then one day he went to see Barnum and Bailey's circus in Bradford. This changed his world. He had never seen anything so colourful, so exuberant, so full of energy in all his life. And the last thing he wanted to do now was be an engineer's apprentice. So he left home. He joined an electric rifle range and he learned how to be a spieler. And as a spieler, where he would call the people to have a go at the electric rifle range, he was a great success. So he bought his own rifle range, met up with a couple of pals, and together, as I mentioned earlier, they toured with the electric rifle ranges until they had enough money to buy their own showground and, of course, eventually come to Glasgow. Now, Pickard, when he first arrived in Glasgow, wasn't a well-known character at all, but by golly, is he well remembered today. I think pretty much anybody over the age of 70 will have a story to tell you about A.E. Pickard. he was so good at promoting himself and this building. One of the joys with Picard in his early days was to draw a bit of attention to himself. He would put an advert in the Daily Record and the Evening Times every day, advertising for titles. He would encourage the public to send in funny titles for A.E. Picard. You see, at those days, the theatre managers, who were also showmen, would promote themselves with fancy titles. And Picard wanted the funniest. And he would actually pay for the privilege. So if he chose your title and published it in the newspaper the following week, you would get £5. Now, £5 in about 1908, when he started doing this, was a phenomenal amount of money. Can you imagine? That's like 2 weeks' wages for most people. So Picard managed to get quite a few funny titles coming to him. Things like, for example, off the top of my head, my favourite ones are A.E. Picard, the skinless sausage, A.E. Picard, the knock-kneed kipper. In later years, A.E. Picard, the Kaiser of the Trongate. So he had all these great titles given to him. And if you buy my book, you'll see a few more. Those are just some of the ones I remember off the top of my head. And like I say, every one that was published received a £5 note. But he had a great way of promoting his venues as well. This was his first venue. This is the one that made his money and gave him his acclaim. In fact, this music hall is where he gave 2 fantastic debuts. One of them was by a young man by the name of Jack Buchanan. And I'm not going to tell you about Jack Buchanan, because when you're finished this video link, I want you to go to our Facebook page, go back to our Facebook page, and I want you to look at the Jack Buchanan video that Pete Crilly put up the other day. It is absolutely fantastic. By the way, it's Pete that's doing the camera work today, by the way. He's doing a great job. Fantastic. Now he's laughing. Don't laugh, Peter. You'll shudder. So check out Peter's fantastic video. It's amazing, because they've also got little clips of Jack Buchanan, which the twins, Debbie and Becca, put into the video as well. So it's absolutely fantastic. I've watched it about 6 times already. Mind you, I did have to subtitle it. So he was famous for Jack Buchanan's debut here in 1911. And of course, the other famous debut that Picard is famous for is one young Arthur Stanley Jefferson. And I'm not going to tell you about that one either, because you'll have to tune in tomorrow morning to listen to Ian Sharp, young, telling you the story of young Stan Laurel and how he got to make his debut here. See, this is why I'm not telling you, you see, these stories. I'm not telling you because Peter and Ian are telling you. But one thing I will tell you, because I've listened to Ian's piece, he doesn't tell the joke in it. I will tell you Stan Laurel's first ever joke, okay? Now, do remember, this was 1906. The boy was only 16 years old and he was still known as Stan Jefferson at that point. The joke went something like this. I say, did you hear the one about the 2 butterflies? One butterfly said to the other butterfly, I am bothered. Why is that then, said the other butterfly? Because I couldn't go to the dance last week. You couldn't go to dance, why ever not? Because it was a mothball. Yeah. So that is the joke that started the career of Stan Laurel. Grant, I can still hear you. That shut him up, didn't it? Sorry, did I blow your eardrums off then? I do apologise. Right, now then. So he had 2 of the most famous debuts in his lifetime. But of course, at the time that he had these debuts, they weren't famous people. It was their debuts. They weren't famous until years afterwards. But Picard made himself famous through his buildings, and he would do crazy things. Like, for example, one of my favourite stories. He opened a cinema in the south side in Kilmarnock Road, Pollokshaws Road, Kilmarnock Road, just where the 2 of them kind of connect. Now, he didn't know what to call it, so he put an advert in the papers for the best title. And the title he chose was The White Elephant, which, if you're over 60, you may remember as The Elephant, because that's what it got abbreviated to. Now, on the day that he opened the White Elephant Cinema in Shawlands, he put out a notice advertising dinner and a fur coat to the first 2,000 entering the cinema that day. Yes, You can imagine the queue, can't you? Right the way up Kilmarnock Road, up Pollokshaws Road, practically back to the River Clyde and the north of the city. Do you know what those women got when they got to the front of the queue? A rabbit. That was your dinner and a fur coat. Oh, he knew how to fill his cinemas, though. One of his favourite tricks here was he put a notice downstairs saying, please mind the step. So everybody tripped up on a step that wasn't actually there. Because it wasn't there, so they would step up for a step and there was no step and they would trip instead. Isn't that great? The man was weird. The pavilion hated him. Oh yes, the management of the pavilion absolutely hated A.E. Pickard. He did some terrible things. You see, he had this habit of going into other people's variety theatres, but he would never just go in normal. No, not A.E. Pickard, not our Albert Ernest, no. Mr. Pickard would always have to draw attention to himself, always drew attention to himself. And there's one occasion where he famously went to the pavilion dressed as an Arab, full Arab regalia, tea towel on the head, full ropes, full Monty. And he went into the pavilion 10 minutes late. The MC was there about to introduce an act and he just couldn't because Pickard was drawing so much attention to himself. So he said, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have to wait until Mr. Pickard seats himself. So they actually had to wait for him to walk down the middle of the auditorium, speaking to everybody on the way, shaking their hand. Yes, talking to everybody. He held up the show for a good half an hour before he got into his seat. And then he said to the MC, you may now start. There you go. What a terrible man. But he was also a kind-hearted man in a lot of ways. Yes, he was naughty, but he did a lot of kind-hearted things too. For example, he owned an awful lot of buildings in Glasgow. He owned a lot of tenement buildings in Glasgow. And a taxi driver told me once that his mother rented a tenement flat right on the top of one of the tenements that Pickard owned. She didn't pay a penny's rent for 30 years in that building because she'd been widowed. She was left with 5 children. She struggled to feed them, and Pickard never once asked her for the rent or never once kicked her out of the building. So there you go. That's kindness for you. Albeit that they used to have to put about 30 buckets out every time it rained because their roof was full of holes, but she never got kicked out of her house and she never paid a day's rent. So he looked after her in his own way, I guess. In fact, the fact that he owned so many buildings in Glasgow became a bit of an issue with Glasgow City Council. He ended up in an argument with the councillor one day at the city chambers. In fact, Pickard turned round to the councillor and he said, you know what? You can't throw a stone in Glasgow without hitting one of my buildings, to which the councillor replied, aye, and if it hits it, it'll fall down, because he also never maintained his buildings. He never spent a penny on this one. You know, there was a fire in this building in 1922. It never managed to get very far. There's a little tiny bit of backstage area that is burnt to this very day behind the cross arch, but only this one section. And when we completely refurbished the stage in 2015, again, only one section of burnt timbers were discovered. We think what it was that the magic act, using a bit of touch paper or something, had gone badly wrong and set fire to that corner of the stage, and it was quickly put out. After that, Pickard was forced to shut the building for a while because the damage was significant enough that the stage was unusable for a small amount of time. Now, this was in 1922, and it seems that at that point he rebuilt the stage and also decorated the auditorium in the lovely colours that, if you watch my feed from Wednesday, you'll see. By the way, we apologise for the quality of that because we were using Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi in here is dreadful. We're now using Peter's lovely iPad and his lovely 4G on that. By the way, Apple, if you're watching, we could do with a couple of these. Sponsorship? Yes? Yes, Apple, please? I know the chance of learning more from Apple watching is very remote. Anyway, darlings, so I forgot what I was saying now, Peter. Do you remember? Was I waffling? I was, wasn't I?
You were making a point, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. We were talking about buildings. And in fact, yeah. So he never maintained them, including this one. And yes, if you look at Wednesday's speech, you will see what the decor is like up close in the auditorium. It's just all tar stained and nicotine stained. It's kind of like a yellow ochre colour. Oh, your knee's hurting, darling. Oh, Peter's knees are hurting. So yes, So it was decorated in the Art Deco colours in 1922, and that is the only decor he ever did in here. We can actually see some of the 1922 decor up here. Follow me. Follow me. We're going to go graffiti wall. So here you can see some of the Art Deco colouring. A lot of the plaster has come off the walls up here. There you can see it's one of the old fireplaces up here, and you've got the sort of like this limey greeny colour with this browny colour as well. You can also see bits of the old windows there. This was graffitied, by the way, in the 1950s and 60s. Oh, and 70s. Yes, so 60s, 70s and 80s graffiti up there, from when it was actually used as a shoe store by Stead and Simpson. They had a shoe downstairs on the ground, shoe store downstairs on the ground floor. Coming back up here though. So Pickard never maintained the buildings. He had lots of them. He actually had lots and lots of theatres, variety theatres, cinemas. He had the casino, the Black Cat, the Norwood. Some of you might remember the Norwood if you're in your 60s plus, because the Norwood was the one at the top of Sauchiehall Street that had the railway that went round it. He opened it with a battering ram, yes, to attract attention to himself. The man was absolutely nuts. I'm going to have to get Peter walking because his knees are hurting, you see, darlings. That's why we're on the move. Come on, Peter, follow me. Stick to the joists, my love. Stick to the joists. Right, are you all right with that camera? Now lift your feet over that. That's it, my love. Come towards me. Come towards me. We're going to go and look at the wall covering at this end. So you've got another one. Right, watch your heads. Yes. This is John Addison's lovely, lovely rooster pool that we're calling through here. Yep, and we're back to safety. Here we go. Okay, this, by the way, is our flying rig. This, we don't do flying in here very much. We don't do very many aerial acts because it's too expensive to set it up. I have to get somebody in to rig it, you see, every time and make it safe. And of course, our capacity is teeny weeny, so we can't really afford it. But we have used this for the Moisture Festival. The Moisture Festival, I hope, is going to come back in 2 years' time for my 25th anniversary of running this project. Right, Peter, I want to look at this wall covering. Now, here we are at the end of the freak show. There's not much of the wall covering left here, but you can see there's a lovely daisy wallpaper here. Isn't it fantastic? So we've got some of the wall covering left here. And Peter? And we can see a little tiny wee bit of the freak show booth cornicing left. There you go. Can you see that? Follow my finger. There you go. Can you see the cornicing? That's the egg and dark cornicing. Now you see, this building didn't obviously start off as a music hall. It actually started life as a warehouse. And where you see the egg and dark cornicing in here, that's the Victorian. So that's the stuff that's been put in by the people that operated this as a music hall and later years as the freak show, rooftop carnival and waxworks. In other parts of the building, we have our canthus leaf. And unfortunately, you can't really see it now because it's completely been destroyed. But that section up there was all our canthus leaf cornicing from when this was actually a warehouse.
A question.
Oh, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Oh, far away.
Andrew Gibbons.
Hello, Andrew. How are you?
Fascinating stuff as ever, Judith. Did Pickard ever find himself at cross swords with the moral campaigners of the day?
Now there you go. Good question. Actually, he did. There's a great story about, for example, Carrie Nation. Carrie A. Nation was a great reformer. Well, she was a temperance lady. She was the leader of the temperance movement in her day in Chicago and across America. And she was 6 foot tall. She carried a hatchet with her, and her battle cry was "Smash, ladies, smash." Now, believe it or not, although A. Pickard was a bit naughty, he was a huge supporter of temperance because, of course, alcoholism in the music halls was a massive problem, not just with the performers, but with the audiences as well. So he was actually a supporter of the temperance movement. And he is the one that kidnapped Carrie Nation and brought her to this very building where she tried to talk and campaign to all of the audience that day in here about temperance and about the evils of alcohol. So he found himself on the right side of that because he was a temperance supporter. But of course, there was also things like the music hall riots and things like that, the music hall strikes, when, of course, the music hall performers and workers were striking for fair pay. And he was on the wrong side of that because he really didn't like paying people very much. So, yes, he got involved in all sorts. He would also allow things like the trade unions to come in and use the building for their purposes. We have trade union pamphlets. Some of them are advertising for workers to strike at the beginning part of it because of the pay being so bad. And then there's other trade union pamphlets from the 1920s advertising for workers not to strike because of the work now going to the Americas because the work was cheaper there. So you could say that he was very much, well, music halls were very much part of that whole kind of campaigning circuit anyway, for and against, whether it would be political, not so much religious in the music halls, although they did come in. We did have people like the Salvation Army in, and then they would kind of petition for your soul. But it was, music hall was a platform for whatever your cause was. In fact, one of my favourites, one final one, is the Tichborne claimant. If you've never heard of the Tichborne claimant, look him up. But he was here as well. He was claiming that he was the missing Tichborne and heir to this massive fortune. Turns out he was a butcher from Peckham. But that's a whole other story. Look up on the online, the Tichborne claimant.
So it's 40 minutes. 2 comments. Alan Bell, thanks for the history, fascinating. And Derek Smith, if Peter's on camera, who is operating the auto cue? Nobody is. It's all Judith. Fascinating insight and a wonderful window into this Glasgow's asset. Brave. Bravo, Judith and team.
Oh, thank you, and my team. Thank you too. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it from me today, because apparently I've hit my 40 minutes. That went quick. I've got loads more to tell you, but very quickly. And unfortunately, this building closed in 1938. I might continue this story at another date, so look out for me coming back with another little video for you. Please, please, please look out for our other videos that are on our Facebook page at the moment. There's a wonderful one from Peter on Jack Buchanan, for example, and you have to see his Albert and the Lion, which we went up live, I think, this morning. Fantastic. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for Ian at 9 o'clock in the morning on his story on Stan Laurel. And tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we have the amazing John Connolly and Phil Differ talking about John's book, He. Please support us, ladies and gentlemen. Please make sure that we survive into next year. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much for your support and joining us today. Stay safe. Bye.
Vosdu from Seattle says hello.
Oh, Ron Bailey. Hello, darling. We finished. The end.
How do I stop?
We don't know how to stop now. We can't stop.